Welcome back to Room 57, where we uncover the most chilling, unsettling, and complex criminal cases from around the world. Today's case is one that has haunted the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and shocked the entire nation. It's the tragic and gruesome story of Sade Carleena Robinson, a 19-year-old college student whose life was violently cut short in April of 2024. Sade's sudden disappearance sparked concern from her family and friends. What started as a routine missing persons case quickly escalated into something much darker. After an intense search, the discovery of severed body parts in a local park revealed the horrifying truth. Sade had been brutally murdered, but the mystery didn't end there. As the investigation unfolded, the case would take many shocking turns. The man responsible for this horrific act, Maxwell Anderson, would soon be revealed. But the reasons behind the murder were even more baffling than the crime itself. In today's video, we'll explore this twisted tale of violence, betrayal, and murder. From the chilling discovery of Sade's remains to the twisted mind behind the crime, we'll break down all the details of one of the most gruesome murders Milwaukee has seen in years. So, sit back, grab a drink, and join us as we unravel the story of Sade Robinson, an innocent young woman whose tragic death led to the unmasking of a chilling killer. Part 1. The mysterious disappearance of Sade Robinson's life before the tragedy. A promising future. Sade Carleena Robinson was a 19-year-old college student attending University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She was an ambitious young woman, passionate about her studies and excited about the future ahead of her. Sade was known for her bright smile, warm personality, and close-knit relationships with her family and friends. She had a bright future, and everyone who knew her described her as someone full of potential. She was majoring in sociology with plans to help others once she graduated. Her life was just beginning, and she had so much to look forward to. On the surface, nothing in her life suggested that this young woman's future would be tragically cut short. But on the night of April 10, 2024, Sade's life would be changed forever. The beginning of the mystery. Sade goes missing on that fateful night. Sade left her apartment in Milwaukee to meet with a friend. She had planned to return home later that evening. However, when the clock struck midnight and her family hadn't heard from her, alarm bells began to ring. It was unusual for Sade not to check in, and her family quickly became worried. As the hours passed with no word from her, her family went into full search mode. Her phone was going straight to voicemail, and when friends tried to reach out, they received no response. Sade had disappeared, and it seemed as though she had vanished into thin air. Her family immediately reported her missing to the local authorities. The police began searching, and local news outlets picked up the story. The search began in earnest, with volunteers, friends, and family members combing the area where Sade was last seen. Initially, the police believed Sade might have simply run off or gotten into some kind of trouble, but as the hours turned into days, it became apparent that something far more sinister had occurred. The shocking discovery: body parts found in a local park after a few days of searching. A horrifying discovery was made that would forever change the course of the investigation. A severed leg was found in a park near Milwaukee's south side. The body part was discovered in Wilson Park, an area where locals often walked their dogs and spent time outdoors. The discovery was made by a jogger who noticed something strange in the grass and alerted the authorities. The initial shock of this discovery quickly escalated when investigators began searching the area and found additional body parts that were later confirmed to belong to Sade Robinson. It was clear that the young woman had been brutally murdered. Her body had been dismembered, and the remains were scattered in different locations. The investigators were left with a chilling scene, as Sade's remains were found at several locations around the park. Each find brought more horror to light, and it became clear that the murder wasn't a random act of violence, but something far more methodical and gruesome. The investigation begins. The search for the killer. At first, the authorities had no suspects. The discovery of body parts in a public park shocked the community, and no one had any immediate answers. Detectives worked tirelessly to identify Sade's killer, interviewing anyone who might have had information about her life and who she had been in contact with in the days leading up to her disappearance. As the investigation continued, police began to piece together Sade's final movements. Her last known location was a party she attended the night she went missing, but no one had seen her leave. Her cell phone record showed no significant activity, which only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. Her family and friends were devastated by the gruesome discovery. They couldn't fathom how a bright young woman like Sade could meet such a violent end. The entire city of Milwaukee was in shock, and the case gained widespread attention in the media. With each passing day, the investigation only became more complex. As investigators worked to piece together Sade's final moments, they began to turn their attention to one person in particular, someone who had a complicated relationship with Sade and may have known more than he initially let on. The first suspect, Maxwell Anderson, a 30-year-old man from Milwaukee, was initially considered just another acquaintance in Sade's life. Anderson was known to be friendly with Sade and had a checkered past involving a string of minor legal troubles. While he wasn't a prime suspect at first, his name began to surface during interviews with people who knew Sade. The relationship between Sade and Anderson seemed to be somewhat close, though it wasn't clear whether they were romantically involved. What was clear, however, was that Anderson had been in contact with Sade shortly before her disappearance. After some investigation, it became apparent that the two had spent time together in the days leading up to the murder. Maxwell Anderson was brought in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Sade's disappearance and murder, but the investigators didn't buy his story. In fact, they quickly realized that Anderson's behavior during the investigation was odd and inconsistent. He gave conflicting accounts of his interactions with Sade, and his alibis didn't hold up under scrutiny. A devastating truth, the final piece of the puzzle after gathering enough evidence. Investigators discovered Anderson's DNA on several of the body parts found at the scene. A key piece of evidence came from blood traces found at Anderson's home, which were later confirmed to be a match to Sade's. The more the investigation unfolded, the clearer it became that Anderson was involved in Sade's murder. Anderson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, mutilating a corpse, and arson for burning the body parts to try and destroy evidence. The brutality of the crime left investigators and the public in disbelief. Sade's life had been taken in such a violent and calculated manner, and Anderson's motives were as puzzling as his actions. As the investigation continued, new details about Anderson's troubled past began to emerge. It was revealed that he had been living in a world of deep financial struggles and personal demons, which might have played a role in his decision to murder Sade. Conclusion of Part 1. The discovery of Sade's dismembered remains marked the beginning of a long and painful journey for her family and loved ones. As the case unfolds, the shocking details of the crime and the investigation come into focus. In Part 2, we'll dive deeper into Maxwell Anderson's arrest, the legal proceedings that followed, and the questions that still linger about his true motives. How could someone who seemed like an acquaintance turn into a brutal murderer? And what drove him to commit such a horrific act? Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mystery of Sade Robinson's tragic death. Part 2, The Hunt for Justice, Maxwell Anderson's arrest, and the dark truth behind Sade Robinson's murder. Maxwell Anderson, the man who hid in plain sight after Sade Robinson's dismembered remains were found scattered across Milwaukee. The investigation began to take a chilling turn. Initially, Maxwell Anderson was seen as an acquaintance, someone who might know something about the missing young woman, but as the evidence mounted, Anderson became more than just a person of interest. He was the key suspect in one of the most brutal and disturbing murders the city had ever witnessed. Anderson's background was somewhat unremarkable on the surface. A 30-year-old man with no prior history of violent crimes, he appeared to be just another young adult trying to navigate the difficulties of life. But as investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered disturbing facts about his mental state and his troubled relationships. It became clear that Anderson was someone who had a deep-seated sense of anger and resentment. His previous run-ins with the law had involved minor offenses, but there was a sense that his behavior had escalated over time. Some of his past relationships hinted at a violent side, though nothing in his record suggested he was capable of the kind of murder and mutilation that Sade had suffered. But as the investigation continued, it became obvious that Anderson had more secrets than anyone could have imagined. The first confession, a web of Lee's first major break in the case, came when Anderson was brought in for questioning by law enforcement. At first, Anderson appeared calm and cooperative, denying any involvement in Sade's disappearance. He claimed to have had no contact with her in the days before she went missing, and his story initially checked out. But as the hours passed, investigators began to notice cracks in his story. Anderson's alibi was shaky. He initially claimed he was at home the night Sade disappeared, but phone records later showed he was near the park where the body parts were discovered. This contradiction led investigators to become more suspicious, and they pressed him harder. During a second round of questioning, Anderson's story started to unravel. The police had pieced together enough evidence, cell phone records, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies to suggest that he had been in direct contact with Sade before her death. His behavior became more erratic as the interrogation continued, and he eventually cracked under pressure. Anderson's first confession was shocking, but it wasn't complete. He admitted to meeting Sade the night she disappeared, but insisted that the situation had gotten out of hand. According to his version, he claimed that Sade had been the aggressor and that the murder was an accident, something that spiraled out of control. He said he had no intention of killing her, and that the dismemberment was an attempt to cover up the crime and panic die. However, this confession was full of inconsistencies. He still couldn't explain the brutal nature of the crime or the disturbing fact that he had kept parts of Sade's body in his home for days before deciding to dispose of them. His story didn't add up. and investigators were unconvinced. The confession was only the beginning of the unraveling of Maxwell Anderson's darkest secrets. The truth comes to light. The mutilation and evidence, while Anderson's confession was disturbing, it did not paint the full picture of what had transpired. That night, as investigators began to piece together the evidence, the true extent of Anderson's cruelty was revealed. The physical evidence found at his residence, including bloodstains and body parts, left no room for doubt. Sade's murder was not an accident, nor was it a crime of passion. It was calculated, brutal, and deeply disturbing. The dismemberment of Sade's body was done with such precision and thoroughness that it was clear Anderson had carefully planned the crime. He had removed her body parts with surgical precision, which suggested that this was no spur-of-the-moment act. It appeared that Anderson had not only intended to kill Sade, but had also gone to great lengths to conceal his actions. Investigators found that Anderson had burned some of the body parts in an attempt to destroy evidence, but the DNA evidence was irrefutable. Blood traces from Sade were found in several locations within Anderson's home, and his fingerprints were found on items used to dismember her body. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The more investigators uncovered, the more chilling it became. Anderson's actions weren't just an isolated incident. They were part of a larger pattern of violence and manipulation. His confession about the dismemberment and the disposal of Sade's body parts only raised more questions about his motivations. A deeper look into Anderson's mind. The motive behind the murder. The biggest question that remained was, why did Maxwell Anderson kill Sade Robinson? As the investigation continued, detectives started to explore the psychology behind Anderson's actions. He was described by those who knew him as temperamental and difficult to read. His relationships were often tumultuous, and he had a history of getting into physical altercations. But none of this explained why he had murdered Sade in such a brutal and deliberate manner. Through further interviews and the examination of his past relationships, a disturbing motive began to emerge. Anderson had been financially struggling, and there were hints that he had become obsessed with Sade's wealth and the life she was building. Some of Sade's friends revealed that Anderson had recently asked for money to help him get out of his financial problems, but Sade had refused. This rejection may have fueled Anderson's growing resentment and anger toward her. It was also suggested that Anderson might have been trying to cover up a personal relationship with Sade that had gone wrong. Perhaps he had grown jealous, or maybe there were other personal issues between the two that had led to a breakdown in communication. Whatever the case, the murder of Sade Robinson was no random act. It was a cold, calculated decision born from jealousy, anger, and desperation. Maxwell Anderson's arrest. The legal battle began since Anderson's confession was complete, and the evidence against him was undeniable. He was formally charged with first-degree murder, mutilating a corpse, and arson. The community was stunned by the revelation that someone who appeared to be an ordinary man had committed such a horrific act. Anderson was arrested and held without bail while awaiting trial. The legal battle ahead would be just as intense as the investigation itself. Anderson's defense team would argue that he had been coerced into making the confession, and that the crime was not premeditated. They would attempt to discredit the evidence and cast doubt on the prosecution's case. However, the overwhelming nature of the evidence made it clear that Anderson's fate was sealed. As Anderson awaited his trial, Sade's family and friends were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The brutality of the crime and the manner in which it had unfolded left them devastated. They had to come to terms with the fact that Sade's life had been taken by someone they had known, someone who had been close to her. The community, in shock, the aftermath of the criminal case shocked not only Sade's family and friends, but also the entire city of Milwaukee. A young woman's life had been taken in the most brutal and disturbing way imaginable, and the city was left grappling with the question of how something like this could happen in their community. People were afraid, angry, and heartbroken, and many couldn't understand how someone like Maxwell Anderson could commit such a heinous act. As the trial date loomed closer, the community held its breath, waiting for justice to be served. Conclusion of Part 2. In the next part, we'll delve into the trial of Maxwell Anderson, examining the legal proceedings that unfolded, the role of his defense, and how the justice system responded to such a brutal and senseless murder. We'll also explore the lasting impact of Sade Robinson's death on her family and the city of Milwaukee. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tragic and unsettling story of Sade Robinson, a story of betrayal, murder, and the pursuit of justice in the face of a chilling crime. Part 3. The Trial and Aftermath. Seeking justice for Sade Robinson. Trial of Maxwell Anderson, a battle for justice. The arrest of Maxwell Anderson brought a sense of closure to the investigation, but for Sade Robinson's family and friends, justice was far from achieved. The real battle for justice would begin in the courtroom, where Anderson would stand trial for the brutal murder, dismemberment, and desecration of Sade's body, with mounting evidence against him. Anderson's fate seemed sealed, but the trial would still be a long and contentious process, filled with legal maneuvering, emotional testimony, and heartbreaking revelations. The prosecution's case, a horrific crime unraveled. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting its case. The evidence against Maxwell Anderson was overwhelming, and they intended to show the jury just how brutal and premeditated the murder of Sade Robinson had been. DNA evidence found in Anderson's apartment directly linked him to the crime. Traces of Sade's blood were discovered on Anderson's clothing, as well as on various tools and surfaces inside his home. The presence of Sade's DNA in Anderson's car and the dismemberment of her body pointed to a clear pattern of calculated violence, with Anderson attempting to erase every trace of his involvement by cutting up and disposing of her remains. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was the discovery of surveillance footage showing Anderson near Wilson Park, the area where Sade's body parts were found. The video clearly showed him entering the park and leaving it shortly afterward, carrying something wrapped in a large bag. Though the footage didn't capture the actual crime, it was enough to establish Anderson's presence at the crime scene. The prosecution also called upon forensic experts to explain how the nature of the dismemberment indicated not only brutality, but also an intention to hide the evidence. In their opening statements, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of the events that unfolded that night. They described how Sade Robinson, a young woman with a promising future, had been betrayed and killed by someone she trusted. Anderson's calculated attempts to cover up the murder only served to demonstrate his guilt. The prosecution argued Sade's family members gave emotional testimony about the pain and devastation they felt when they learned of her death. Her mother, father, and siblings took the stand, describing Sade as a loving daughter and a bright student with an infectious personality. They spoke of their disbelief at how her life had been snatched away by a man they had never imagined capable of such cruelty. Their testimonies resonated deeply with the jury, reminding them that Sade was not just a victim, she was a person with hopes, dreams, and a family who loved her. The defense's strategy, attempting to cast doubt. While the evidence against Maxwell Anderson seemed damning, his defense attorneys weren't about to give up. They argued that Anderson's confession, which had been extracted under pressure, was unreliable. They contended that Anderson was mentally unstable and had been coerced into confessing to a crime he did not commit. The defense focused on Anderson's mental health history, bringing in expert witnesses who testified that he had struggled with depression, anxiety, and possibly post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). They argued that his difficult childhood, along with past relationships that were marked by emotional instability, contributed to his distorted sense of reality at the time of the crime. In other words, the defense claimed Anderson was not in control of his actions when he killed Sade. Furthermore, the defense cast doubt on the forensic evidence, questioning whether the DNA findings were truly conclusive. They attempted to argue that the evidence could have been misinterpreted or that it was too circumstantial to definitively prove Anderson's guilt. They also sought to highlight the possibility of other suspects, suggesting that someone else could have been involved in the murder, though no evidence was presented to support this theory. Ultimately, the defense's strategy was to sow confusion in the minds of the jurors, hoping they would question the reliability of the evidence and the validity of Anderson's confession. But despite their best efforts, the jury was unmoved by these arguments. The evidence against Anderson remained undeniable, and the emotional testimony from Sade's family left a lasting impact on the courtroom. The verdict, Maxwell Anderson's fate. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury was finally ready to deliver their verdict. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and the public, all waiting for the final decision in the case. The tension was palpable as the judge called for the verdict to be read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of first-degree murder, mutilating a corpse, and arson." The words echoed in the courtroom, and a collective sigh of relief rippled through the family of Sade Robinson. For them, this verdict was the first step toward healing from the unimaginable pain that Anderson's actions had caused. They had fought tirelessly for justice for Sade, and now that justice had been served. The judge immediately scheduled a sentencing hearing, where Anderson would face the full consequences of his actions. The courtroom erupted in emotional reactions, some of relief, others of anguish. For Sade's family, the journey toward closure had finally begun, but it was clear that no verdict could ever fully heal the wounds left by their daughter's death. Sentencing, the weight of the crime. The sentencing hearing, the prosecutor once again delivered a passionate statement, emphasizing the brutality of Anderson's actions and the irreparable harm he had caused to Sade's family. The prosecutor asked the judge to impose the maximum penalty, citing the heinous nature of the crime and Anderson's lack of remorse. Sade's family spoke directly to the judge, expressing the immeasurable pain they had endured since Sade's death. They spoke about the emptiness they felt every day, knowing that Sade would never walk through their door again. that they would never hear her voice or see her smile. They asked the judge to hold Anderson accountable for taking their daughter's life and causing such destruction. The defense argued for a more lenient sentence, suggesting that Anderson's mental health issues warranted a lesser sentence. They requested that he be given the opportunity for rehabilitation, rather than a lengthy prison sentence. However, the judge was unmoved by these arguments. In the end, Maxwell Anderson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought a measure of relief to Sade's family, but they knew that nothing could bring their daughter back or erase the horror of what Anderson had done. The aftermath, the impact on Sade's family and Milwaukee. While the trial of Maxwell Anderson was over, the emotional toll on Sade Robinson's family would last a lifetime. Her parents, siblings, and friends had been forced to confront the reality of her violent death in front of the entire nation. The images of her dismembered body would haunt them forever, but they took some comfort in knowing that Anderson would never harm anyone again. Milwaukee, too, was deeply shaken by the crime. The city had never witnessed such a brutal and senseless act, and many people felt a deep sense of loss and grief. Sade's story became a rallying cry for the community, bringing together people from all walks of life to raise awareness about domestic violence, mental health, and the importance of supporting victims before it's too late. While the community mourned Sade's loss, they also celebrated her life, remembering the girl she had been, the person she had wanted to become, and the promise she had in front of her. Her death was a tragic loss, but her memory would continue to inspire those who knew her to work for a better future. Conclusion of Part 3. The case of Sade Robinson serves as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty, but also the resilience of a community and the enduring power of justice. The brutal murder of this young woman shook the very foundation of Milwaukee, but the pursuit of justice for her has helped bring the killer to account. Maxwell Anderson's sentencing marked the end of one chapter in this heartbreaking story, but the impact of Sade's life and death will continue to echo for years to come. In the final part of this series, we'll take a closer look at the lasting legacy of Sade Robinson, her family's ongoing efforts for justice, and the broader lessons that this tragic case has taught us about the fight for victims' rights, mental health awareness, and the pursuit of true justice. Let me know if you'd like any revisions or if you'd like to proceed with the final part. Part 4, the legacy of Sade Robinson, justice, healing, and the unanswered question. Shay's long road to healing, Sade's family, and their continued fight for justice. While Maxwell Anderson's conviction and subsequent life sentence provided a sense of closure to Sade Robinson's case, the emotional toll on her family and friends was far from over. The brutal murder of their beloved daughter, sister, and friend left deep scars that would take years to heal. For Sade's parents, Mark and Lisa Robinson, and her siblings, the verdict did not erase the trauma of losing a young woman who had so much potential. At the sentencing hearing, Sade's father, Mark Robinson, gave an emotional statement recalling the day his daughter was born, her childhood, and the dreams he had for her future. The loss of Sade was devastating for the entire family, and the fact that her life had been taken so violently left them broken. Her mother, Lisa, spoke of the empty chair at the family table and the countless moments of silence that echoed through their home. No amount of justice could bring Sade back, and no punishment could ever truly make up for the life that was stolen from them. As they tried to rebuild their lives, Sade's family found solace in remembering the bright, compassionate young woman Sade had been. They worked tirelessly to keep her memory alive, launching campaigns to raise awareness about domestic violence, mental health, and the importance of supporting individuals who may be struggling with mental health disorders like Anderson. Sade's tragic death had illuminated the darker sides of society, and her family, despite their grief, channeled their pain into advocacy, helping to educate others about the importance of early intervention and support for those suffering from mental illness. The unanswered questions: what drove Anderson to kill? Even with Maxwell Anderson's conviction, there are still lingering questions surrounding the motives behind Sade Robinson's murder. Anderson's defense had tried to paint a picture of a man who was emotionally unstable and suffering from mental health issues. His story about Sade's supposed aggression and the crime being an accident seemed far-fetched, and while Anderson eventually confessed to the crime, many aspects of his actions remained shrouded in mystery. Was his act of violence truly a spontaneous outburst driven by some form of mental illness, or was it a calculated act of revenge or greed? Anderson's financial struggles were well documented, and rumors circulated that he might have been motivated by a desire for money or some form of control over Sade. There was even speculation that Anderson had been jealous of Sade's life, her relationships, and her future, but no one will ever truly know the full extent of his inner turmoil or the exact reasons that led him to commit such a brutal crime. The psychological profile of Anderson remains a subject of debate among experts. Some believe that his mental Instability, combined with a history of failed relationships and personal issues, may have led to an emotional explosion, culminating in the dismemberment of Sade's body. Others argue that Anderson's actions were not the result of a mental health breakdown, but rather the actions of someone who was cold, calculating, and determined to cover up his crimes. The fact that he went to such lengths to hide the evidence speaks to the level of premeditation that might have been involved. What is clear, however, is that Anderson's crime was not a random act of violence. It was the result of a deep psychological unraveling, combined with personal motives and the decision to silence someone who had once been a part of his life. The exact reasons for Sade's murder may never be fully understood, but the devastating consequences for Sade's family and the community of Milwaukee are undeniable. The broader impact of Sade's story, raising awareness in the wake of Sade Robinson's murder, there was an outpouring of support from the Milwaukee community and beyond. People who had never known Sade took to social media to share their outrage and express their condolences. The story of her tragic death resonated deeply, and many people found themselves reflecting on their own relationships and the importance of mental health awareness. Sade's family, devastated by their loss, turned their grief into action. They launched a fundraising campaign in Sade's name to support organizations dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence and those struggling with mental illness. Their efforts brought attention to the connections between mental health, personal relationships, and violence. They also worked with local lawmakers to improve laws surrounding mental health services, hoping to ensure that no other family would have to endure the same horror they had faced in the months following Sade's death. The case became a rallying cry for those fighting for victims' rights and the mental health crisis. In America, many began to question the stigmas surrounding mental illness, realizing that the lack of adequate support systems could lead to devastating consequences. Sade's story was a reminder that untreated mental health issues can sometimes lead to violence, and that society must be more vigilant in recognizing and addressing these problems before it's too late. The legal lessons learned. What could we do better? Sade's case raised important questions about how criminal justice and mental health intersect. Many experts and advocates pointed to the failure of the system to identify and intervene in Anderson's life before he became a murderer. While Anderson's mental health history was known to some, the support and treatment he needed were never provided. The case highlighted the gaps in the system, where individuals with mental health issues can slip through the cracks, often without the necessary care or supervision. The criminal justice system, too, was criticized for not addressing Anderson's mental state during the investigation and trial. Had he received proper treatment and been monitored, perhaps Sade would still be alive today. In the wake of this tragedy, many have called for mental health reform, arguing that better screenings and early intervention could prevent such acts of violence. Advocates are pushing for improved mental health care for those in the criminal justice system, as well as for a greater focus on rehabilitation and prevention rather than just punishment. Sade's legacy, remembering a life cut short. While Sade Robinson's life was tragically cut short, her legacy is one of resilience and strength. In the months and years following her death, her family and friends have worked tirelessly to honor her memory, ensuring that her story is never forgotten. They have dedicated themselves to making a difference in the areas Sade was passionate about, particularly in helping others who may be struggling with mental health issues. Her story also serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of young people, especially women, in their relationships. No one ever imagined that someone like Maxwell Anderson would be capable of such violence, but his actions left behind a devastating impact, not only on his victim, but on the entire community. As Sade's family continues to fight for justice, they become vocal advocates for victims' rights, mental health awareness, and public safety. They've worked to ensure that Sade's legacy is not defined by her brutal death, but by the positive change they hope to create in her honor. The final words on the case. Sade Robinson's death was a tragedy, but it has led to an important conversation about mental health, victims' rights, and the need for change in both the criminal justice system and the broader societal response to violence. While no amount of justice can bring Sade back, her family's fight for awareness, reform, and healing will continue to inspire those who follow in their footsteps. The journey for healing is ongoing, but with every voice that speaks out in Sade's name, with every person who learns from her story, her legacy will remain a powerful force for good. What do you think about Sade Robinson's case? Do you believe mental health played a key role in this tragic story? How can we as a society better support those struggling with mental illness to prevent tragedies like this from happening? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Room 57 for more deep dives into criminal cases and discussions on justice, mental health, and legal reform. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on our latest videos. Thank you for joining us today, And remember, Room 57 will always be here to shine a light on the stories that matter the most.